Right, good evening and a very warm welcome from the Western Cape Woodturners Association. I think it's been close on, 130 days since the start of lockdown, and I think a little presentation is long overdue. I do want to start off by saying that I do suffer from a condition known as audiolensio-catalitis. Those of you that don't know the condition, it's the fear of having your head cut off when you're being photographed or videoed. But that's a problem probably akin to me and maybe Phil Irons. So, guys, a warm welcome and thank you for this opportunity. I think that I know that just before lockdown, I was due to do a demonstration on pens. Not necessarily how to make pens. I think most people can make pens, but I have made, I think, many thousands by now. I do produce a couple of hundred at the end of each year for the Christmas craft markets, and so I thought I'd just go through a couple of the idiosyncrasies, maybe the kind of like the special techniques, things that I feel save me time. I am in terms of wood turning, obviously making pens is a lot of repetition, but using different types of wood, different styles of pens, it is very satisfying. And I guess you could say that I'm in a production phase of my money-making phase of my wood turning as I prepare for retirement one day. So I'm busy putting in the 10,000 hours, if you like. So yes, I thought I'd start off, if you make a lot of pens, you will often find, for whatever reason, that you would have to take a pen apart. Maybe there's a crack in the wood, maybe with the pen that I have over here, as a sample, one of the very first acrylic pens that I made is that the super glue and the gold of the tube is shining through brilliantly, and so I would feel terrible trying to sell this pen. So what I would want is the pen parts. How do I get them back? And to do that, you do need, I would say, if you're going to make a lot of pens, you do need a pen disassembly kit. And I have one here. And so it's basically a punch set, pen disassembly punch set with a whole lot of different diameter rods. And so I'll take this pen apart now as a demonstration. Those of you that know pens well will know that you have the tip of the pen, you have the center band, which slides on the twist mechanism, and then you have your cross style refill for the slimline, which has a bit of thread at the top, and that turns into the back of the twist mechanism. Further to that, you also have your clip and your cap, the cap which secures the clip. So removing the cap to get the clip off is pretty straightforward, and what one would have to do is find one of the punch or the rods that slides quite a tight fit, but slides quite nicely in the tube. And I typically hold the tube in my hand with 3 fingers and then use the pinky as a backstop so that parts don't go flying. So I would typically hold it quite tight like that, take a hammer and hammer until the parts just lodge. There we have it. So I've now managed to remove the cap and the clip from the tube, and now I can throw that in the bin. The next part, the lower half of the slimline pen, is not that straightforward. You would obviously want to remove the center band from the twist mechanism, and also remove the cross style refill. And now with this, I remember the first couple that I managed to take apart, you have to remove the tip of the pen before you can remove the twist mechanism. And this rod, this punch, I think it was Johnny Walsnach that gave me a good tip to actually remove the sharp edge on the end of the rod. Because the first couple that I did, this obviously slides through because it's the diameter of a refill. And the first couple that I did, I actually managed to, the sharp edge actually managed to hurt the inside of the tip, and then it showed on the outside. So just by removing that on the bench grinder, taking a bit of the corner off, made a big difference, and actually you don't damage the tip. So once again, in the 3 fingers, using the pinky, knock that, and the tip is out, and then slide the punch out, and then going back to the original punch for the 7mm tube. From this side now, knock out the twist mechanism. The twist mechanism, for some reason, tends to be a bit of a tighter fit than the cap and the tip. So sometimes it does require quite a bit of sustained effort, but eventually you will manage to, with the right amount of force, there we have it. I have it out, and I can throw the second half of the tube, the second part away, and I've got all the parts. I can just by paying, I think it's in the region of 10 Rand for a set of new tubes, which is all I need, and I've got the parts to remake a pen that once seemed destined for the bin. Yeah, okay. Okay, Aaron, do you want to stop it there and then? Right, so I've got an order for 100 pens, and I've taken all the brass tubes out of the packets. So I have a job. Obviously, the first job at hand is to roughen up, to give a key to 200 pen tubes, assuming that you're making slim lines or streamlines. So how do I go about taking the tube and sanding it, giving it a bit of a rough so that the super glue adheres really well to it? So I do have some, I tend to like to use 150 grit, and one way to do it is to do it by hand. Okay, so I'll sand all the way around, turn the tube around, but a much quicker way to do it, and this is something I use all the time, is you could use a metal rod of sorts that the pen tube slides onto quite easily. But what I've done in this case is I've given it a slight, you won't see it on the camera, but I've given it a little bit of a nick. I think I put it in a vise, and I gave it a bit of a tap with a hammer, so that it's not entirely, in fact, if you feel it with your fingers, it's not entirely straight, especially towards the tip. It means that the tube, which should slide on it quite easily, actually gets stuck over there. And that actually holds it quite nicely. So I'm going to show you how I do it, and I don't switch the lathe off at all. I actually leave it running. So I'll typically run it at about, I'd say, 400 to 500 RPM, and while it is spinning, I will slide it on, jam it, and then I'm not going to over sand it, but I do want to remove the oxidization, and you'll see it'll give you a nice little shiny surface. And while it is, I'll just slide it off, put it in my pocket, and go to number 2 of the 200, and it's done, and keep going. So I'm using 150 grit, and I find this works pretty well. in the pocket. Moving on to number 4 of 200. And I think you get the idea. It's a lot quicker than sanding it by hand. And by sanding it by hand as well, it actually hurts your fingers. So that's just a little something that I use. It's quick and easy. And when you're doing bulk, when you're doing big numbers, you save a lot of time by using something like this. Right, so I just thought I'd show you what I have in this box over there. I don't know if you can see that. The beauty of lockdown, I managed to prepare blanks, pen blanks for streamlines and slimlines, and I've got 300 pieces of wood in here, 150 pens, all drilled, ready and waiting to receive brass tubes. So all my pens, all my pen blanks are numbered, so you can see that. Depending on sometimes I use a blue koki, sometimes I use a red koki, sometimes I use the alphabet, sometimes I use numbers. So when you're doing big numbers, but it's very, very important to have your grain match up. So when I cut wood and I number them before I actually take them to the lathe to drill the holes. The drilling on the lathe, I don't think I need to explain too much, but that's pretty straightforward in the chuck. At a reasonably low speed, I tend to drill in, try and get close to halfway, come back, depending on the type of wood you use, that you're drilling into. But this system works very, very well using your Jacob's chuck and your 7mm drilling the hole through. What I want to do now is I've got a piece of coffee pear, here, and I'm just going to show you how I glue the tube in. I like to angle the tube down slightly so that the super glue, thick super glue, the 305, if you hold it like that, the super glue runs to your fingers. So at a slight angle, and I like to, I find that if you coat the bottom half, it's enough. So that when you push the tube into the wood, the excess actually runs up the tube and covers the rest. So I'm going to put some glue on like that. So about just past halfway, and then put it in, up and down, slide it around a little bit, and don't take too long to get the tube. So now you'll find that obviously the wood is slightly longer than the tube. The one end, because you've done that, the brass tube, the edge of the brass tube will be very close to literally flush with the edge of the wood. Whereas on this side, there'll be a bit more wood to take away. Now, I've pre-glued one of these, the other half of this coffee pear. And so there you've got pretty flush and a bit more meat on this side. So I'm going to place this in the chuck. And tighten that. I'm going to up my speed. I like to do it at high speed. So this is way too slow at the moment. And before I start getting that face flush, I'm going to show you the chisel. I use a skew which has a very sharp angle, and I'll hold it closer to the camera. So when sharpening this, that top edge over there is very, very important if you want to prevent tear out of the end grain. So I would typically sharpen both sides so that I have a very nice keen edge on the top of the grind. So I'm going to up the speed here. Okay, as fast as it can go. And now I'm going to feed in, and Obviously 90 degrees is what you want, and you get a feel for the 90 degrees. Having done it a lot, I know that if that's not 90, I know that's not 90. I'm looking at the shadow line of the wood, I'm looking at the chisel, and I'm feeding in a little bit at a time. I'm not sure if you saw that. I've just literally touched the brass tube. A little bit of the tube came off, but I'm happy with that. It's very close, and I'm now going to remove that, turn it around, and go again. Now I've got a bit more meat before I get to the tube, so I'm going to just by taking a look, I can see I'm very close to the brass tube. There we go. And I'm happy with that. I'm now flush with the, you can see I've got it flush on both sides. Flush on both sides. I'll hold it closer. And I'll now, once I've done through a whole batch of this on the lathe, I would typically take, I like to do the mandrel. I like to do this by hand. So I've actually attached mine to a little handle. I put some tape on here to give it a bit of grip, and I would typically place that in there, and I would turn it by hand. So I'm happy with the surface. I'm pretty happy that's very flush. One thing I did not bring with me is I've got a little countersink at home, and what I then like to do is I like to just in my fingers, look, big countersink, just run it in there to remove the little burr that is formed on the entrance to the tube. So that's how I prepare my blanks for my pens. I also find that if you have cross-grain timber, if you're working with something like this, if you're working with at an angle, you're going across the grain, the bit, when you drill the hole, the 7mm bit tends to wander. So you have to be a bit more careful when you drill these. And sometimes with the thicker pens like the Streamline, you can, using this method I'm using now, you can find that the face is quite a long way off in terms of perpendicularity to the tube. So that's why doing this by hand is quite important that you get it flush. Also, the mild steel barrel trimmers are terrible. I've used this one for a very, very long time. It's still pretty sharp. It's got 2 tungsten cutters, and I find it works very, very, very well. And like I said, I like to do this by hand to remove, to get it all nice and. So what we have here is the setup for the. This will be my setup on the mandrel to turn a slimline pen. This is the brass thumb screw, and if I want to do a streamline, I tend to use the slimline kits, and for a streamline I would remove the bush in the middle, and I'd put a thicker bush for thicker pen for the streamline. This bush is actually the bush that I bought to make a letter opener. So it works pretty well. This is the letter opener bush which I use to make my streamline pens. So just thought I'd show you that. So you'll also notice, probably won't see it, but when I first started making pens, I went through a lot of these bushes, and now I hardly ever replace them, because using cyanacrylite using super glue, what happens is you tend to build up a coating of super glue on the actual bush, and I often use that coating on the bush when I turn the pen down. When I get it close to the sides of the bush, you can actually see the toe or the heel of the skew touching the super glue and not the metal as such. So you just develop I'd say a knack for knowing when you're close to. Sometimes you have to be careful about the build-up as well on the actual bushes. But I do know that there's a good bit of super glue on there, so I use that as a guide. You'll notice that when I put my pen blanks, this is a piece of wild olive. I've got, if you look at the camera, I've got 14 and 14, so I've matched it up nicely. And there's my bush, and tighten the brass screw. Now the brass, the thumb screw is brass, so you don't have to go, I think the word is ape, to you just make it nice and tight. It doesn't have to be over tight. The other thing to consider as well when working on a mandrel is the looking after the end of the mandrel. Now, what I have here at the moment is not suitable. Okay, so this tailstock is not suitable. The angle of this tip is too sharp for this mandrel. So I typically I would have a guess and say that the angle of this tip is probably about like 20 to 30 degrees. So I use a 45 degree. So it's a 45 degree tip, and that seats very, very nicely on the end of the mandrel. Also, yeah, once again, you don't have to over tighten. Bring it up and just make sure that it seats nicely in there, and you will know that, especially with the brass thumb screw, if it's not tight enough, the wood will actually spin on the mandrel. So I'm going to, once again, I'm going to crank up the speed as fast as possible. So I'm going to go really fast. That happens to be 3,600 revs, and using a spindle guide, I like to work it on its side so that it makes a nice cut on the work. Come back. Now, what I like to tell the boys is that it's very, very safe. You can actually jam this tool into the wood and nothing should happen. So I'm going to jam it in. And as you saw, the wood will just spin on the brass tube. Same on this side. So it's very safe. It's not going to grab the chisel out of your hand. It's not going to go flying. So with this, I like to try and remove most of the wood. So here we have, we're not too far away from where I want to be. I could probably take a little bit more off, and then now I'm going to move on to using the skew and working side to side cutting with the toe and cutting with the heel of the skew. We're going to so there you can see the angle that is closer to not exactly what I used. That's a much sharper angle that I used to turn the end square. This one's a bit more of a gentler angle, and I'm going to maybe try and come a bit closer with the tool rest. What I'd like to say about this is that what I'm doing here is it's all in the fingers. You see, I'm working like this. I'm not working like holding my right hand. I'm right-handed, but my right hand is not on the back of the chisel. It's all close to the cutting edge, and I just feel that by working like this, I have better control. I have better feel, and it's you talk about working with soft hands. Doesn't mean your hands are soft, but I just feel closer to the cutting edge. I just feel that it's something that works for me. So I would, and when I get close to the actual bush, I would very subtly bring the toe in there, or very subtly bring the heel in on this end to give me an idea of how close I actually am, almost like a guide. Give me an idea of how close I actually am to the bush, or the kind of like that coating I told you about that is on the bush. So I'll do the one on the right. Right, I'm pretty happy with that. I know that I'm close, and a little bit of sanding, a little bit of finishing will take me even closer. So running very nice and true as well. Now the finish that I use super glue, the thin, and I use the acclaimed Johnny Wilsnath method of I typically start sanding with 220, 320, 400, 600, 800, 1000, 1200, and then I will apply 4 thin coats at high speed, sand down with 800, 1000, 1200, another 4 coats, same method, and then 2 clear coats, two coats, but not sanded, and then I like to use the name of the product. What is this? Yorkshire grit. There we go. I like to use Yorkshire grit to get a very nice shine at the end. But like I said, finishing is a different topic, and it's maybe something that we can look at another time. But the purpose of this demo was just to give a little bit of insight into how I prepare stock, how I actually get the ends of my pens, my pen blanks, perpendicular to the brass tube, and how I go about turning. So yeah, that's it from me. I don't think I have anything else other than to say that we're all thinking of you. We miss you. The club I've been back 2 or 3 times during lockdown to come buy some super glue here and just to check on the building. We have a broken window, a few things, but it's just not the same without people. We miss you, and obviously hope maybe our next demo will involve the actual finishing of pens. So that might be a good demo. But thank you very much. Stay warm and hope to see you sooner than later. Stay safe. Thank you.